Shalom. So, General Griswold Grimm ordered that I make this video, and here it is. It is called Propaganda, and two very important books, both of the same name, are called Propaganda, which if you are serious in knowing what we are talking about, is my voice not working well? Is there a sound? Oh, okay. So the book by Edward Bernays, I linked an audio version of it on YouTube in the chat. I recommend everyone do listen to it and understand it, because what happened was that Edward Bernays was able to move our understanding of, Gavin calls it the Minerval arts, but really persuasion and communication in a very important way. And part of the problem here is that too many people think they understand human communication. They don't. Human communication is incredibly complicated, and the people who understand communication well can be analogized to rocket scientists. And that's why I wanted to start with an analogy of flight. On the left there, you will see a drawing of a helicopter. And on the right, you will see a much better drawing of a helicopter. Now, I hope it's clear to you that the helicopter on the left would never fly. It probably is not clear to you that the helicopter on the right would also never fly, because these are just scaled down models. And somebody who actually knows how to build a real helicopter has to understand all the precise details that go in. And frankly, that's really complicated. And if you expect me to, if you expect me to teach you like things which honestly I spent years studying, and many other people have spent much more time than I have studying, and that's not going to work. This is a just helping you more, like on the right, understand why, for example, there is the tail rotor on a helicopter, but that's not going to make you understand the whole thing. Second, this is a nuclear bomb going off. It should be clear to any thinking person that the physicists who, like Einstein and Bohr, came up with the understanding of fundamental physics which allowed for the creation of the nuclear bomb, much less the people who came up with airplanes, are not in any way directly responsible for Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We're talking about technology here, and technology has progressed. We've always had we've always had rhetoric. Rhetoric has the word is from ancient Greece, and people have always used rhetoric. It's not new. And it should be pretty obvious that it is possible to have technological progress in rhetoric. That's what has happened. New psychotechnologies have been deployed, and Edward Bernays was somebody who, in a very real sense, moved our understanding of how human beings make decisions, how human beings are influenced by each other in, I would say, something very much like Einstein helped us understand physics much better. Now, there is, for example, the century of the self. There are all kinds of attempts at vilifying Edward Bernays. But ultimately, this isn't about him individually. It's about what he was able to explain we actually do in our lives. I want to make distinctions between communication, advertising, publicity, and public relations, because they will help you understand how things progressed. Now, ultimately, yeah, in a very real sense, all of these things are the same. Communication between two people. Yes, as Noah says, a hammer can build a house or be a tool of mass murder. Communication between human beings always takes place. And all of the things that really apply to public relations, or what people have started calling propaganda, in order to affect how you feel about it, they are in fact just methods of communication. But what happened specifically with the printing press, it became much more possible to create advertising, and advertising that wasn't really the same as sending a town crier to give a message, or so we ended up having mass circulation of books, mass circulation of newspapers, and that allowed for advertising, and then more ways of communication like radio, television, and now internet came into being, which allowed a paid form of advertising, which is ultimately, when you pay to put your message in a mass media, right? That's advertising. Publicity is when you don't pay for that. And P.T. Barnum is the most famous for publicity. He's somebody who understood that you don't have to pay for advertising. It is possible to do publicity work, and many people started doing I did not do saving throws, although I probably should have. Publicity in terms of having a publicity stunt, right? You can gain people's attention. You can do advertising without spending money on it. Sorry for the ambulance going by. And then Edward Bernays came up with the idea of public relations, which is two-way communications, which are done on a much more professional level. So he is most often vilified for. And the one example of Bernays having a huge effect on our society is freedom torches. And you can go look at the Wikipedia article on it. That's where I got this image. There was advertising of cigarettes to women before Bernays, but what Bernays realized in consulting with psychologists, his uncle was Sigmund Freud, and actually it's quite likely that Bernays is the reason Freud is famous, not the other way around. He realized that there is a sexual element, and that cigarettes can be marketed to women as something that is both sexy and that is liberating. And yeah, I mean, obviously now there's a lot of people who are like, maybe he shouldn't have done that. But you have to understand that Edward Bernays, at his time, thought that what he was doing was just giving information to the entire world, really. He was actually very transparent. Go read his book, and I do recommend reading his book. He wanted to see professionals of public relation. He wanted to see the public relations being used ethically, and he thought that it would be widespread, that people would understand these techniques that he was teaching. And in a way, he was, in fact, inoculating the public to some of these effects through making everyone aware. Painting him as some sort of evildoer or something like that is simply to be ignorant. Honestly, read his book, listen to his book. It is a very short book where he explains very fundamental and important things about our society that everybody should know. But what happened was that public relations created commercial success for companies in using these techniques. Companies were more successful. Public affairs is when government and politics does public relations. Actually, no. Bernays really did think that lots and lots of people would read his book. He did, and he made it for the common man. And it's a very simple book that explains things clearly. A whole public relations industry came into being, and it is a multi-billion-dollar industry. There are people like me who went to school. I got a bachelor's degree in public relations, and that's what they do. They work in public relations. And frankly, it became a matter of general competence. It wasn't just people who call themselves public relations people, but every businessman, everyone who wanted to be successful and was serious, started to use these technologies in order to. By the way, Grim, if you want to come on, that might actually work as well. I will send you a link. Okay. Yes. I will, but in a minute. Grim. So to do what's um well, in a minute, let's talk about Jacques Ellul. Jacques Ellul, I don't believe was a Christian at all. Jacques Ellul was a postmodern Christian, and his book Propaganda was an example of propaganda as propaganda. I don't recommend most people read it. Certainly not until after you have read Bernays' propaganda. Um, yes, I know United Fruit Company. Again, um, so Jacques Ellul is an example of people using, and lots of people used Bernays' techniques for things which uh, obviously we don't like, including, for example, the Nazis. Yes, I went there. They used propaganda in order to uh, affect their agenda. And so we ended up with people like Jacques Ellul who thought, oh, why don't I use these tools to destroy the other people who are using these tools? And unfortunately, we ended up with a situation where lots and lots of people are using these tools in order to uh, gain their way, and we may in fact end up with ashes because people are using fire in all kinds of ways they shouldn't. So, what are the actual things that yes, Christian anarchy is an impossible construction, and Jacques Ellul was a horrible postmodern artist. And if you want to see propaganda as propaganda in a form of artwork where he is lying to you while explaining what lies are, he's actually he was brilliant, but he was not a Christian. He's um, honestly, he's more like Jim Jones. And if you didn't know, the Reverend Jim Jones, of Kool-Aid drinking fame, claimed to be a Christian. He did. And it was because of understanding propaganda techniques that Jim Jones was able to. So, yes, again, I have to say, if you're looking for a bad guy of propaganda, unfortunately, a lot of people think Bernays was the bad guy and Ellul is the good guy, and no, it's the other way around. And unfortunately, very smart people seem to think that, and they're wrong. Um, okay, so what did um, what did Bernays bring to public relations? He brought scientific methods, actually knowing your statistics, knowing how to um, do sampling, really looking for uh, scientific ways of achieving the goals that public relations has. That included an awareness of actual psychology. Look, if I am trying to convince you of something, what shouldn't I look at what psychologists say about how beings behave? Yes, I should. I should seriously study how to get my objectives done in communication. Results orientation. And I have to say that results orientation has been an important part of why public relations has had bad effects in the world. Is because when you try to maximize one thing, right? You hire someone and yeah, unfortunately, I'm very glad, Zach, you understand that. Burn power. I didn't know Pajot. I have talked to Burn about this. I think he's unfortunately unaware of the the evil of Ellul and Ellul's book Propaganda. But the results orientation, you hire someone and you say your job is to make sure that this brand of whatever works. We're going to be talking as an example about McGuffin's mouse trap, right? That's putting something at a level of hierarchy and not recognizing the bad results that can have at that, especially when you have organizational objectives, right? So you have a company like Coca-Cola, which is, that's their job, is to maximize the number of people who drink Coca-Cola. Yes, that was my point, Noah. Yes. And these cause a lot of the problems that we see, because the techniques that propaganda use include influencing influencers, right? So let's say you want to sell your brand of jeans. You know what? Giving your jeans for free to famous people who will then wear them can do that in ways that advertising does not. Build coalitions. Maybe it's best once we get into the examples, but the bacon and eggs breakfast that we have is a coalition of the pork growers and the chicken farmers, which Bernays, who hired Bernays, and he's like, hey, bacon and eggs go great together, and now we all eat bacon and eggs for breakfast. Guess what? It was by creating a coalition to make bacon and eggs be breakfast in America that Bernays made that happen. Fragment publics. Have different messages for different people. Not just one message. I mean, it makes a lot of sense to people to recognize, hey, maybe I want to do different advertising in New York as I do in Florida, as I do in California. And fragmented publics, while it seems deceptive, I have to say, we do that on an individual basis. We talk to people based on our relationship with them. And smoke and mirrors. There's a lot of things you can accomplish by turning people's attention away from something and by making them pay attention to something else. Okay, let me give you an example. McGuffin's mousetrap. Imagine you were hired by this guy McGuffin who has a new mousetrap, and he wants his mousetrap to become the mousetrap. So how would you help him achieve that? Let's say he gives you $100,000 and says, help make my mousetrap everyone's favorite mousetrap. Seriously, think about it. The most obvious thing you're going to think of is probably advertising. Buy McGuffin's mousetrap. Well, Okay, that works. But let's go back to influence the influencers, build coalitions, fragment publics, smoke and mirrors. There are lots of things you can do in order to make McGuffin's mousetraps the best mousetraps. Let's say you start a coalition of people who are against traditional mousetraps, which are and have them banned because those traditional mousetraps are uh, are less humane, right? You can, in fact, start lobbying to make other types of mousetraps illegal, right? Um, I do not, Zach. I want to give you an example of just simple messaging. And I actually took a class where we discussed this. Now, let's look at the relationship of $1 and $2, right? $1 is 50% of $2. $2 is 200% of $1. $1 is 100% less than $2. And $2 you can say is 50% of $2 more than $1, or it's 100% of $1 more than $1. All of these statements are true statements. There are no lies here. Yet, deciding which one of these statements you're going to use is one of the most ancient things human beings ever did, and something we all do naturally. But a company that is deciding on its that's deciding on its messaging has to do that professionally and think about it. And to vilify that idea is to not consider that it's an inevitable thing that people are in fact doing. Now, there are much more advanced techniques than just this. Framing matters, which is why postmodernism is evil. Okay. There are things you can do, like elevating some voices, creating a culture, changing your own attitudes, and sabotaging others, which can be used in order to make McGuffin's mousetraps more popular. Go find somebody who has some problem with however mousetraps are right now and elevate that voice. Give money to PETA, and normal mousetraps are inhumane. You can create culture. You can even create newsletters, create magazines, create all kinds of things which advance the goal of what you are trying to advance. You can, in fact, make changes to McGuffin's mousetraps by doing research, by looking at how human beings react, by sampling, by all kinds of actual market research. You can change your client themselves, and you can, in fact, sabotage others. Like I said, go and lobby for a law that makes it illegal for the other mousetraps to be sold because they're inhumane. guess what? That's probably going to help your mousetrap work a lot better. And which brings us back to cigarettes. If you are aware of all the things that tobacco companies used over the years to sell cigarettes, you can see all the negative effects that has had, including funding research in order to make all kinds of ridiculous assertions. Okay, now if you want to see people using these methods, Edelman Public Relations, look them up. $1 billion a year individual corporation. One corporation that is earning $1 billion a year. A year. Correct the Record was the bot farm. They had the bot farms, which they advertised they had for Hillary Clinton's campaign, where they were just making negative comments to people who criticized Hillary Clinton on, and there's an article in the LA Times about it. And these are people who actually admitted it. There are plenty of people who are doing this stuff who aren't admitting it. There are governments who are involved in all kinds of, look at the CIA campaigns. Creative Artists Agency is just one of the more important companies that is actually doing the public relations for all kinds of people, including, if you didn't know, Jordan Peterson, who hired them to do publicity for him. Yes, well, some people would say he is working for Creative Artists Agency, but the fact is, Creative Artists Agency is working for him, and that is a two-way relationship, because all relationships ultimately are. What are the solutions? I don't think that it is a real solution to talk about the individual psychotechnologies any more than it is a real solution to try to teach everyone how aerodynamics works. That's not necessary. What is necessary is to secure our distributed cognition through awareness, transparency, and accountability. Let me explain what those words mean. We as human beings have distributed cognition. Our understanding of ourselves and our world is not contained in our own skin. Anyone who tells you to think for yourself is your enemy. You cannot think for yourself. You should not think for yourself. I am not saying you should not think. You should think. You should think not just for yourself. You should think for others, and you should help others think for you, and you should ask others to think for you. If you are thinking for yourself, you have decided that you want to field an army of one in a battle royale where there are people with large armies. That's not going to go well for you. Do not think for yourself. But what you have to do is secure that distributed cognition. You have to recognize what the faults of that are. You have to try to figure out how to make your cognition better so that it cannot be manipulated by other people. And I would say the three methods I would recommend are Be aware that you distribute your cognition. You do, in fact, distribute your cognition. Anybody who thinks they think for themselves is already making a huge mistake. Other people think for you. And if you are aware of the people who you outsource your cognition to, that's already a level of secured distributed cognition most people do not have. Transparency. You want to see why people are saying the things that they are saying. Anonymous people, anonymous information, it could be anything. And transparency, knowing who you are talking to, who you are distributing your cognition to, is incredibly important. And accountability. Ultimately, the way you know whether someone is a good source of distributed cognition or not is the effect that they have, that their information has. You want to see that people who give you information give you good information, and holding them accountable for that information, for that thinking, for that cognition, requires, first of all, that there be transparency, that you actually know who you're talking to, and second, that you hold them accountable for the things that they say. If they tell you things that are wrong, that matters. Okay. That is the end of my presentation. If people want to come on to discuss this, I am not going to just let anybody on because, first of all, I have my Bible study in 20 minutes, which is not going to be affected by this. Second, General Grizz thinks I did a great job, so he's glad he didn't jump in. Let me see what other people have said. Great point. Outsourcing cognition is important to know. All distributed cognition is in some part outsourced. All cognition is in some part outsourced. If you think that you are thinking just for yourself, that you are not influenced by anyone else, you're just being silly and stupid. It is an idiotic thing to say, think for yourself. It is an incredibly idiotic thing to tell someone to think for themselves. I hope to never hear anybody say that again, and certainly not as if it's some obvious good. I'm aware of my distributed cognition every time a PVK phrase pops out of my mouth while preaching. There you go, Father. Is saying something stupid like "don't think for yourself" and then having a long way of spelling out what you mean a propaganda tactic? No. But it's not stupid to say "don't think for yourself." Do not think for yourself. Do not think for yourself. It is an incredibly stupid thing to do, which is to think for yourself. No. Think for yourself, Jacob. You shouldn't have to burden the network with figuring out that simple thing. No. Like the Bible says, wise man seeks good counsel, and I can find all kinds of biblical things. No, you should in fact not think for yourself. Think for Jesus. Think for humanity. That's good. Think for your family. Zach says, communism isn't a political theory, it's a state of mind, and that state of mind is hungry AF. Buccaneers grocery store tweet from 7 hours ago. Oh, wow. Okay. Thinking for yourself is all about individualism. Love the call out to wisdom involving more than just you. Can confirm. Thank you. Jacob's using fancy words to tell me, listen to your wife and outsource cognition to your wife. Yes, think for your spouse. Think of your spouse. Think for your children. Yeah, those are really, really good things. How does this apply to education? I currently pay for Christian education. Are you telling me I'm doing the right thing? Not sure what you mean. Paying for Christian education is not just thinking for yourself. Yeah, it's good to pay other people who can educate you. Education is important. Yeah, not sure if that was the point of what you were asking. What about us who find who thinking to just get in the way? Okay, so this is a defense tactic that many people have fallen into, which is, and the greatest classical case of this is the know-nothings. When our distributed cognition gets corrupted, we naturally start to jettison the distributed cognition, which is a kind of good thing, but because you are in fact trying to secure your distributed cognition. The most secure distributed cognition is no distributed cognition. And if you are being poisoned by your distributed cognition, many people fall into the trap of let's stop thinking, let's stop listening to the thinkers, and that is a bad long-term solution. You will eventually need to outsource your cognition, and using that defense mechanism of not of staying away from thinking is not going to be a good long-term solution for you. Glad to hear it. Education and training are different. See video on navigating patterns. Okay, I mean, you can create vocabulary if you like. Go think for yourself is the new go F yourself. Yeah. Fleba says, I'm outsourcing my children's education to other Christians rather than using free public education, which is getting rather suspect in Canada. As I said on Grim Gray's channel, if you have children and you are sending them to public school, you are a child abuser. The most important thing you can do as a parent is to educate your children and educate your children well. And if you are, it is a very bad idea to homeschool without outsourcing to good educators. You need to do that. The question is, who are good educators? And that is incredibly important. So you are outsourcing to one space instead of another. Good job. Be discerning about where and how you distribute or outsource your cognition. Yep, I agree with that. Just make sure you do some of that education. Don't rely on schools to do all of it. Yeah, I mean, be aware that you are distributing your cognition. And be aware of how you do it, hold them accountable, and do it well. Thanks again, Jacob. The Ellul hate was particularly tasty. Have a good Bible study. Thank you. Are you guys good sources of cognition and education? I hope so, but that's, again, goes to awareness, transparency, and accountability. Be aware that you are outsourcing your cognition. Seek transparency in those sources of cognition and demand accountability for them. Sam Harris outsources all of his cognition, being the self is an illusion. So Sam Harris, I made some videos on Sam Harris and why he lost his mind, and part of the reason why Sam Harris has lost his mind is in fact because he has a very good cognitive network, which um, his distributed cognition works well generally, which is why he depends on it, which is why he's lost his mind, because his distributed cognition, while generally working well, has been hacked, and that's his problem. You don't outsource all to one space. It's not a flat world. Honestly, yeah. Part of being aware of your distributed cognition is recognizing that you should, in fact, distribute everything to more than one source if you possibly can. And people naturally do this, but they all. So when people triangulate between various political factions, that's in fact what they're doing. They're like, oh, I'll listen to the Republicans and I'll listen to the Democrats and I'll decide between them. And that works unless that framework itself has been hacked, which is what people have done, and that's why it's malfunctioning so poorly. Sometimes we're just overthinking underthought thoughts. Again, I think you are relying on the defense mechanism of securing your cognition by reducing your distributed cognition. It's an okay strategy that many people naturally fall upon. Again, it's not a good long-term thing. He never had his mind. I like when people triangulate on mistakes I am making. Why would you like that? Oh, I think you might. I'm not sure what you mean by that. Okay. If there are no other people, I am going to take a break before my Bible study. I secure my cognition by applying 15% trust limit on the information. Right. So segregation and duplication is a very good way of helping to secure your cognition, which is by not letting any one source dominate your cognition on any one thing. Seems low, Graham. Honestly, most people, I mean, you should definitely not put more than 80% of your cognition in any one source. But yeah, the fact is, it takes a lot of trust, transparency, and accountability to earn a trust that is worthy of higher than 15%, I would say. It's risky to go that high, but you gotta live in a little. So yeah, so Chris is more skeptical than I think he really should be, but it's understandable. Okay, later, people.